Basically, I've always just been a game fanatic. I'm old enough that I did play like Space Invaders in the arcade and, had Pong at home and Atari 2600 when it wasn't retro. I think I've always kind of had a passion, like they've always just filled a part of my life that nothing else has. I don't think I totally understood that game design was a career that I could pursue. My previous career was aerospace engineering. My first job out of college was Lockheed Skunk Works, which was like the dream company that I wanted to land at. And I got there and I found myself spending all day thinking about games. I didn't know anyone that made games for a living, and there weren't as many materials online, so I was just like, well, I guess I'll just try to make some games. So I made this trilogy of non-collectible card games called, I still love this name, Night of the Ill-Tempered Squirrel. I had watched the movie Ed Wood with Johnny Depp about this auteur, horrible B-movie monster director, Ed Wood. So I made this game about you're trying to make the worst movie possible. And then Witch Hunt, which I got inspired after going to the Salem Witch Trial Museum. That was a game all about falsely accusing your friends/neighbors and getting them hanged for witchcraft, and you want to win by having your villagers survive to the end. And then the third one was Shrimpin', which was after watching Forrest Gump and the whole bit where he opens up a shrimpin' business with his friend. For whatever reason, those three games all happened really fast, and so I packaged them together and I sold them as a trilogy, but they weren't printed, they were print and play. So this was 1999 or 2000. So I was kind of a pioneer in the early print and play board games, which I also like to say is, as a pioneer, I was the first one that got shot with arrows and murdered, because who wants to download and print out their own board game? But what it allowed me to do is learn how to make and publish a game without having the money to actually physically print a game. I'm a kind of a game systems designer with no artistic ability at all. So board games are still really where just you and a paper cutter can make this happen. And it's the purest isolation of game mechanics, which is kind of a specialty. But I ended up doing aircraft engineering for a good 8 years before I finally broke into games full time. But during that 8 years, I was doing board games and stuff, moonlighting basically, nights and weekends.
So I grew up, my parents got me a Sega Master System when I was pretty young, and I played a lot of Wonder Boy and Alex Kidd and as many games as I could get my hands on. They got a PC, it was like a Tandy 286 or something. I think Eye of the Beholder 2 was one of the first games where I really immersed in it, and the sense of wonderment and uncertainty and dread that came from exploring and stuff. It was the first game I think that really elicited an emotional response in me, more so than just the standard did I beat it excitement, that kind of thing. I loved superheroes growing up. I was always drawing, emulating what I saw in comic books, and trying to at age 13 develop my own style, which is insane. One day my style would be Todd McFarlane's style, and the next day my style would be someone else's. I was just copying. But I learned anatomy and all that stuff slowly over time. And then I got this issue of X-Force. It was like a Rob Liefeld comic, but he did the first 2 pages, and then Mike Mignola did the main section of the book. It was like a flashback or something. And I remember I hated it. I felt like comic book art should be super detailed. I just decided that at some point. So I was super pissed off when this hardcore black and white was in the middle of the comic. Yeah, I read it and then I got mad, put it away, and then I was like, who even draws like that? And I'd rummage through my stack and pull it out again and look at it. And really, it actually just stuck with me, how sculptural it was and how minimalist it was. This was such a rejection of those fundamental beliefs that I had built for myself, that I think it kind of shocked me and really opened my eyes to wow, there's a million other ways you can draw things. That was my first exposure to Mike Mignola, and obviously it was a big influence on me. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself after university. I got accepted for an animation diploma, and I hated animation. I fucking hated animation. But I liked doing the texture painting, and I liked doing the concept art and that kind of thing. And during that time, I kind of created a 2D side scroller along with Dana Fortier, who works here now. So this side scroller I did was called Hateful Chris. I read No Logo by Naomi Klein, and then I watched Fight Club, and then I lived in a tent, and then when I came back, I was like, consumerism's the worst. So I made a game about it, and we even got a PS2 publishing deal with Ubisoft. Unfortunately, they canceled it, but that was my first foray into the games industry officially. Was I kind of created my own job in a sense. And then after that kind of fell apart, I just did some freelance here and there, and then got picked up to work at Digital Eclipse, which became Backbone, I think, within the first year of me working there. And I worked on a massive RPG for the N-Gage phone. was really cool. It was a fun project. I learned a lot, but the screen kind of left a lot to be desired.
So I joined Backbone Entertainment in 2004, and that's actually where I met Chris. At first, it was just, I had a lot of respect for his artistic ability. And then gradually, as that happened, then we started becoming friends.
I think I just recognized in Tyler that there was someone who valued some of the same things in terms of game design. Like, he's a real systems-focused guy, and I really like that too. But I don't have the math background to pay those checks. I think we recognized that we had complementary skill sets, and we also got along and shared sense of humor and that kind of thing. And I think we really bonded over poker, actually. That kind of became the foundation of our friendship. It was just games and poker and whiskey.
Companies go through these ups and downs and growth periods and various diversions, and we both weren't too happy there after a couple of years. I remember we were both getting kind of itchy feet at the same time, and I was like, I want to be the first one out the door, not the last one. And then Chris was like, hey, I'm leaving. I was like, damn it. We had both kind of gone for different opportunities that popped up. I went to a little company called Big Sandwich Games.
And I've been working for this film and television company, and I was phasing myself out of that. So I freelanced again for a little while and then did a stint at a Microsoft studio. And then that game got canceled. And I have a storied history of canceled games.
Our kind of actual careers kept doing this, where someone would kind of become free and the other person, well, I'm busy. But we always had that kind of in the back of our heads, and we would talk about it a lot, that, hey, we should work together sometime. He had come up with this cool idea that we'd been talking about. And this idea we just kept coming back to. Every time we get together, we just talk more about it. Oh, well, you know what we could do there? We do this, or what if this? That would be crazy. If you really think about it, it would really suck to be an adventurer.
It kind of started as a joke. The way power and the power fantasy of video games is always represented in the measure of a man is the size of his sword in games almost. And I felt there was an opportunity in there somewhere to sort of subvert that idea, because really you could give me the biggest, most powerful battle axe in the world, and if an actual skeleton was coming at me, I'd be terrified, so scared I probably wouldn't even be able to swing this giant magical axe. We talked a lot about firemen and policemen and soldiers and people who commonly are referred to as heroes, but then they go home and some of them chain smoke and others gamble, and they're just people, they're flawed. And I've always really loved the idea of the duality of someone who can be aspirational in their public life, but then also have their own struggles like we all do. The name, Darkest Dungeon, all of that was just kind of these loose ramblings in a sketchbook. I just like the name, big fan of alliteration.
There was so much material there to start riffing on, and then every time we'd be together, we'd just get really excited. We could just fill notebook pages with different things that we could do, and so it had this organic way of it. It just built steam. We were both getting older, and we were being offered, other good positions. We were both management level, and we knew that, the next play for our careers, if we wanted, was try to go to a big AAA studio, say, or, I've always loved the indie thing, so it's gosh, do I go to another indie company?
I just feel like I got to a point where I'd had enough. If a project was going to get canceled, I wanted to have an intimate understanding of the why and the how, as opposed to just being informed one day that that was it. And the only thing I hadn't done is really take a shot, on my own project. But yeah, the timing finally lined up. We went out for drinks to gut check it. We went to this beer restaurant. They have 84,000 beers on tap, but we just drank whiskey all night. And then by the end of it, it was just I don't even want to know what we looked like.
We had some whiskeys, and I remember looking at each other no, for real, we're gonna do this thing now, right? And he's because I just got an offer from this company.
And kept asking each other, are you serious? Because we're gonna do this, man. We're gonna do this, man. And back and forth. I think we probably just said the same thing for 4 hours. We'd made this a blood pact, whiskey pact to finish the game and see it through and see how far we could go. Red Hook Studios officially came into business in 2013, and it was Tyler and I. He was on an IKEA chair, and I was on my office chair, and we were packed in this little room. I can't imagine how bad that room smelled. My half of it smelled amazing.
The concept behind Darkest Dungeon, there's so much of it that literally is in the title. We have our standard kind of quips that we'd give at trade shows about, it's the worst job ever, it's uncertain pay and threat of constant death. And that's kind of part of it. But also I think we were craving like certain adult sensibilities of looking at it. You know, if you take a film like Saving Private Ryan or something, you know, where it went from the kind of the John Wayne approach of representing World War II to the like, hey, you know, this is pretty shitty. Like everything doesn't get tied up in a nice little bow. There's mixes of heroism and cowardice. And honestly, like what is heroism without cowardice? It's not that we wanted to make a game about how everything is shitty. We wanted to make a game about when you really accomplish something heroic in a situation that is horrible, then it's all the more meaningful.
I think it was really rooted in almost like our time Tyler and I spent as managers, where you can set expectations for people, you can put targets, you can talk to people about their performance, but you can't force people to do things. You don't have like direct agency over people. So I think we both really responded to this idea that the party generally takes their cues from you, but if pushed too far, they'll begin to act in ways that are outside of your control. Our particular brand of horror centers around the idea that you could lose a very valuable asset on a coin flip at any time. And so that vulnerability and uncertainty is what creates a sense of dread in players and aligns them with the desired tone of the game.
There was a period when Chris and I thought it would just be us, that I would make it in Game Maker and he would draw the art and it would be one of these little like 6 to 12 month projects and we would just do it and kind of get it out of our system and hopefully make a little dough.
I think he believed that was going to happen more than I believed it was going to happen, but that was the ostensible plan.
Fortunately, we both had saved some money, but we definitely knew we didn't have enough to fund through to completion. That meant a couple things. We needed to search out people that were willing to join us that also could sustain themselves for a while. And we also went in search of money, so Kickstarter was kind of always on our strategy. And we also pursued what's known as the CMF, the Canadian Media Fund, which is a really cool thing here in Canada that helps fund the arts, and in this case, interactive media. They tend to fund like alternative things that, if they have a human or a Canadian connection, that's even better. We had a lot of thoughts, but like as part of like the application for that stuff, you had to actually write some documents on like what is the product and what is your business plan and all these kinds of things.
So that was cool because it forced us to talk through like all the different stages of the project and like what the game could actually look like. It's like one of the first games to really highlight the psychological damages that can happen from just like killing stuff all day.
And I remember writing like the grant application for those, thinking this is, if anything was made for the CMF, like this is gonna get through.
I thought it was a slam dunk, and they reward like these innovative games, and we got rejected.
When the CMF rejects you, they write up kind of a little bit of a report, but you'd never know for sure exactly what the case is, because I think it's a bit of like a jury selection process where multiple people are judging it, whatever. And yeah, we got some feedback, and I remember, one of the pieces of feedback I thought was funny is when I did the financial projections, because one part of the application is like, what do you think the game will do? And I remember trying to make a realistic, conservative projection, because my goal in that was to say, hey, look, like we don't have to be a hit. Like if we just do okay, you'll make your money back. So, it's a good investment for the CMF. And one of the feedback was, this doesn't look like a strong enough investment for us. And I was like, well, shit, I could have projected it sold 5 million copies then. We could have applied again, but by that time we were like, you know what, this is taking away from actual development. Our best path is just keep making the sucker and bring it to Kickstarter.
At the time it was a little demoralizing, I guess, but I think we believed strongly enough in the vision that, it didn't really slow us down. It was kind of like, well, we can still find a way to do this.
Originally, one of the first ideas we had for the way exploration and combat would work was kind of like top-down. You're like 4 little isometric dudes on a tile, kind of like a board game. A lot of what inspired us early was thinking of board games.
It started as a top-down perspective because that's the first thing you think of, right? And sometimes you got to get your bad ideas out first. So I did a bunch of sketches and mock-ups of what it could look like top-down. We even had this idea where there'd be 4 people on a square and you could rotate the party depending on which monsters were coming at you or something. But ultimately that just made it feel like a grid-based puzzle game, or it also it's really hard to relate to the top of someone's head. It just didn't really echo this vibe of claustrophobia and discomfort and latent horror that I felt like was important. Instead, it gave the players a god's eye view. And when you're God, you're invulnerable and you don't feel threatened by anything. And I really felt it was important, both of us really felt it was important to threaten the player and make them feel as vulnerable as the heroes in the game. And so the bigger and juicier we can make the sprites, and the closer and more in line with their eye line the player's perspective is with the hero's perspective, that would be a better approach, and at least more holistically in line with the thematic core of the game. And so that kind of led to like this exploration of like, we could do combat side view. And I was over at Tyler's apartment and just was like scrawling stuff on a piece of photocopy paper. And I'm like, no, check it out. And they just smash together.
I probably like voiced some initial opposition on that. Like, well, I don't know, because like probably in my head, I was already working out a system for the other stuff. And it's really easy, like once you're partially down the road of like figuring out a system, and then someone's like, wait, detour. But combat was kind of where we wanted to start because we knew that the game was going to hinge on combat working. And that new idea of the kind of the way we did the positional, like the 4 heroes and 4 enemies, and we hadn't seen anything exactly like that before. I thought the interesting thing about the presentation, how it all tied together, is I thought back to games like Pool of Radiance, the old gold box like Commodore 64 game where there were cute little pixels, and then when they attacked, they just had one keyframe that just was like whack and a little sound effect. But it was still like kind of satisfying, like whether you hit or miss or crit, it just felt good. Like I've picked that game back up in the last year or two, and it still feels strangely good.
And we got that to work, and then we had this like whole thing of like, okay, well, how do you even explore a dungeon? Because the risk is like, if you do a side scroller, well, then now they have to jump, and then we have to have things for them to jump over, and then there's 4 of them, so do they all jump? And then are we making a platformer now?
Oh my God, that exploration was so stressful. I think the side scrolling in the dungeon, I think that came about because, hey, we're in combat, we're already seeing the side of these guys. We should spend more time looking at them this way. It'll be weird if we're just cutting from like a top down, running in a dungeon to like side on in combat. And so it kind of came out organically. In retrospect, all it has to do is tie together the combats. And so we originally started, it was gonna be really simple, like you just automatically walked. You guys would just walk and then they'd hit something and then you make a decision, they'd keep walking. And that felt terrible.
I had like nightmares of like the reviews being like, darkest dungeon, moving right into shit, or something, like just like, because I just felt like maybe we're not gonna pay it out properly. And it wasn't fun to just watch the guys, so we like, okay, well, what if you just pressed forward and held it? And it seems absurd, but that made all the difference in the world. It made it a lot more fun, oddly enough, to just press forward.
Just adding to where it's active. You move forward, you can stop when you want, made exploration feel tons better, and we realized it all worked.
I tried to develop an art direction for it that reinforced a lot of these thematic and mechanical characteristics of the game. So I looked at a lot of medieval woodcuts, illuminated manuscripts. I looked at a lot of old comic book art, Chris Bachelot, Mike Mignola. The Marquis by Guy Davis was another big touchstone for me. These sort of stark and almost like, in the best possible way, they're ugly. You know, a lot of hard edges. There's not a lot of round, smooth lines in the game to sort of reinforce this idea that your decisions are tough and uncompromising, and it's an edgy, sharp world. It's not a comfortable world. The pooling blacks and having everything sort of recede into darkness is meant to sort of evoke this idea that you're constantly fighting against being swallowed up, either by, you know, desperation or fear or some affliction or some monster literally swallowing you up. Overall, there's a sense of like grit and noise in the art, and that's there because I wanted the game to feel like it was almost made in the time it's describing. I wanted the game to feel old and papery. The assets themselves look like they're kind of like well-worn. The way the heroes are well-worn, and the way the players get well-worn after 80 hours of failure. So works on a couple levels.
You know, I had worked with Chris like twice before, and I really liked his imagination and like his creativity. I'm a visual person, so that was the sort of thing that really drew me in, at least at the beginning. And then once I saw the mechanics and how all these systems and things were going to tie together, that was like, oh wow, okay, cool, this is really neat. The original idea was to not even really have any animation. Before Chris approached me, they were just going to have kind of like little standy guys that maybe moved around like that. But it didn't work, it didn't look good. So it was like, okay, let's just fully animate everything. I really wanted to show off a lot of the detail in his drawings. So it was very much about moving like all the little things, having everything move.
We were kind of like simultaneously trying to find a way to market the game as well as develop it. And one of the ways that we did that is by making a kind of an announcement trailer that also kind of served as a visualization, you know, of what the game should look like.
The trailer kind of served 2 purposes. One was for us to sort of vet our own decisions and see if we could actually make this side-scrolling thing feel like it was cool and like it paid out. And the second was to gauge whether or not there was a market for what we were doing. And so in working through that teaser trailer, I grew to understand more about how we could do the presentation and what was important and what could get sort of left behind. You know, the footage in that is sort of faked or mocked up. I mean, we weren't trying to be disingenuous. We never said it was gameplay footage. It was really just an attempt on our part to sort of come as close as we could given the tools we had at the time. But it was really valuable, especially from my standpoint, because I got to kind of really explore the writing tone and develop the art style and then see it implemented in a way that was representative of where the game would ultimately end up.
Chris's art style, I think, lends itself to a very distinct type of sound that we wanted. Usually audio, it's sort of like the last pillar that gets involved in production. So we usually try and see art and then animation and effects in for any given asset, and then we design our sounds to it. Because I love horror movies so much, I was always wondering why certain movies were scarier than other movies to me. And Darkest Dungeon allowed me to really explore what I wanted to do in a video game in the audio realm. My involvement was testing out the viability of this product. So we had gotten in contact with Wayne June to do some narration and Stuart Chatwood to do some music. And we got their assets and saw video footage of what the trailer was going to be like, and we just got to work.
I was just blown away by the look. It's exactly what I like writing music for. It's like dark, gothic, and deep. I feel there's a schism in the audio world with composers where a lot of composers want music that serves the story, and if you notice the music, they go to the extreme where if you actually even notice the music, they're not doing their job because they want the music to be almost like an underscore blending in with everything. Myself, I'm a fan of John Williams, like a lot of people, and I love bursting out of the theater and like singing the song as I walk down the street or getting ready to go see the movie and you've got the song in your head. So there was that idea in the back of my head that I did want music that would be timeless and memorable. And luckily they shared the same vision for that.
There is a place beneath those ancient ruins in the moor that calls out to the boldest among them.
This must have been 2002, somewhere around there. I was doing H.P. Lovecraft audiobook productions. H.P. Lovecraft is a horror author from the early 20th century. He's kind of known as being the father of weird fiction.
At first I shall be called a madman, madder than the man I shot in his cell at the Arkham Sanitarium. Later, some of my readers will weigh each statement, correlate it with the known facts, and ask themselves how I could have believed otherwise than I did after facing the evidence of that horror.
I got an email one day from a guy named Chris Barassa who said he liked listening to the stuff while he was working. And that was pretty much that until 2012, when I got another email from Chris Barassa saying, we're going forward with a game that's got an H.P. Lovecraft theme, so we'd like you to do the trailer for it. Since he heard my H.P. Lovecraft productions, he should just give it that gravitas, give it that weight and give it that feel.
The first time I heard Wayne June's voice, I was immediately enamored with it. We basically just had him act as himself because the audiobooks he had done were mostly Lovecraft. So it was really, I think it was an easy process for us because it was already in his wheelhouse.
A couple weeks later, Chris said he had been talking to his partner, Tyler Sigmund, and they had decided they wanted to expand the role of a narrator's voice in the game, and would I be interested in doing that? So I said, of course, and the rest is history. Chris had sent me some of the artwork that was going to be featured in the game. And the second I saw that, I was just, ecstatic because the artwork is crazy good. And the fact that he understood Lovecraft, few people do, it seems. The theme of the game was Lovecraft. Chris Barassa, he knows Lovecraft and appreciates Lovecraft. You could tell by the lines he wrote for the game that he got it. Lovecraft uses kind of archaic language, 19th century stuff almost, inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, some of it stylistically. He uses archaic words and, Chris had them all. He had all the weird adjectives. So I was like, oh man. With the two of us working together on that, he did the writing and I did the talking. Since we both understood where it was coming from, it just worked out great. He's a man after my own heart.
Wayne June was exceptional, and I think we used him to great effect in the trailers. And I think just the overall tone and mood was enough to sort of wrap people in. The conventional wisdom when you make a trailer or a teaser is to like put flying text on there in case they watch with the volume off. It's to cut every like 2.5 seconds or something, show a new feature every 6.5 seconds. I was like, that's all bullshit. Like all that is a template. And so that's not what our game is. It's not flying text. It's not new things popping up on the screen every so often. Our game isn't like a lineup of shots at like a bar. It's a cognac, you know what I mean? It's a red wine that you sit and you sip. And so I wanted the teasers and the trailers to all feel like that. It isn't bombastic. It doesn't come at you with screeching metal and flying text. It just settles into this somber narrative driven by one guy. And in there, there's the spirit of the game, but it's not trying to show you the game. It's trying to sort of give you an imperfect look at the experience you're gonna have. And I think that was really important too.
Finishing that trailer, I mean, we were stoked ourselves. We were excited, like we could watch it and get pumped. It captured so well like what we were trying to do. And so it's something that was not just useful for showing other people, but I mean, it kept our hype up. Just the whole We Are the Flame, you know, it's cool. I just love that arc of we're a bunch of badass adventurers. We're going in here, we're gonna kick ass like every other game ever. And then they just get murdered. And then it ends in like a you're nothing type of vibe. And so that is Darkest Dungeon.
And their screams will echo amidst the pitiless cyclopean stones of the Darkest Dungeon.
When we launched the Terror and Madness trailer, it got really good numbers on like Twitter and YouTube and stuff. It was a high time for sure. It felt like, you know, suddenly we had stuck our heads out and people wanted to see more. And we even showed it at like a local Vancouver indie meetup and everyone was like clapping and cheering.
Everybody that I knew or that knew Chris was like, wow, that's really cool. That's gonna be, there was a lot of excitement and buzz around town about it. And everybody thought it was gonna do well.
I was as excited as everybody else. It looked extremely professional. We were hitting all the points that I thought we were hitting audio-wise, like the music was great, the narrator was incredible. The reaction to the trailer was really good. It gave us a lot of validation for what we were doing.
I try to be the vision holder for the IP, and so to see that there was like a good, excited response to what amounted to like a fusion of the, you know, this writing style, this narrator, this art style, this music, all of those things coming together and resonating with people was like hugely encouraging. And that sort of gave us the confidence to say, okay, we're ready to like really hammer on development and build to a Kickstarter campaign.
We did a lot of work on the Kickstarter, so we felt like we had put our best foot forward. You know, we were hoping to get what we asked for, which was 75 grand, and we would have had to dramatically scale back what we were gonna accomplish, but we could make something for 75 grand in addition to our personal savings.
Fewer monsters and enemies from a granular standpoint, but probably a little bit less ambitious in terms of a narrative scope and even down to the animation polish, number of skills. Like we would have pared everything back to try to just deliver the same core experience, but I don't think, obviously, it wouldn't have been as good because there would have been so much less of it. But our commitment was always to make the game.
You know, I was hoping it might double. You know, if we got to 150, maybe 2, that would be amazing. You look at the success scenarios like the Banner Saga, and they had gotten like 700 grand or somewhere around then. Hyperlight Drifter, I think, had already come out. And so those were two we looked at a lot to learn from, but also to see as kind of what we felt were like the cap of what an unknown indie team could get. And we definitely didn't think we would get there. I mean, I think it's generally a bad idea if you're planning for like the hit level. If you plan to be a hit, it's almost a guaranteed failing business. But we got up higher than I thought we were gonna get. We, I think, got like 85K in 24 hours. And I think we ended at like 313.
I remember that very clearly. Like we funded in a day, that was incredible. I would get up at like 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, like check Kickstarter. Did it go up? Did it go up by how much? It actually went down a little, like, yeah, and just you obsess about it. And I remember talking to Tyler, I'm like, well, they can pull their money out anytime, right? And he's like, well, yeah, but you know, they're not gonna. And I'm like, but they might. So the whole month was like, okay, yeah, we funded in a day, but like, I just felt like the other shoe could drop any minute and it would all just disappear. We'd gotten a loan actually from Clay, and that allowed us to sort of set our ask for 75K on Kickstarter.
To this day, like if you look on our splash screen for the game, it'll show Clay Entertainment. A lot of people ask like, oh, were you published by Clay? No, we self-published, but we wanted to ask for an amount on Kickstarter that was realistic to what we could make something with. And in order to ask for that low, we needed some other money lined up. So I think we showed the game to Jamie at Clay, and he really liked what we were building. So that was a huge vote of confidence. He gave us a bit of a loan. And then funny enough, the Kickstarter did well enough that, like a month and a half later, we're like, here you go, it's back,
Overfunding allowed us to pay the loan back and sort of told us that there was actually much more of an appetite for what we were making than we had initially thought. Especially at that time in my life, I recognized how hard it was to earn $1. And so when somebody pledges for like $250 or something, I'm like, wow, like that's insane. Because like it's just a web page right now, So I really wanted to honor all of those pledges and do everything we can to make it, even the Kickstarter, a great and entertaining and engaging experience. I did a bunch of live streams and drew things on Twitch and talked to people about what we wanted the game to be, and just tried to show how passionate we were about the game. I'm sure every game creator says that. I even hate that it just came out of my mouth, but it's true. Our plan was to actually finish the game in 18 months after the trailer came out. I don't know when the scope actually started to sort of change. Things get a little hazy for me because it was a lot of work.
We were just a couple people in a room just trying to hammer on this thing. The way that we developed Darkest Dungeon, which I wouldn't necessarily say is good advice, is we barely showed anyone except for just like snippets.
We did hardly any playtesting. We were a very small team and we came in very hot.
We're always saying we're coming in hot on Darkest Dungeon 1, the sort of expression of like coming in, landing on the aircraft carrier at like faster than you should be. And that was pretty much every single milestone for us in Darkest Dungeon. Chris and I are a little maybe oversensitive to like, we only want to show stuff when we have something really impressive to show. We had such a specific vision, I guess, that we felt like it wasn't worth showing until we had something that was representative of what we wanted to make. And then if they're like, oh, I don't find it fun, then we really wanted that feedback. The problem is you really want to get feedback early. And so we would show some stuff to other developers, but honestly, like until we were happy with it, we didn't even want to show that because we're like, we could show this, but I already know a million problems with it.
When I first signed on, the game looked very done. The game probably looked about 80% as good as it does now. And I was looking at it and kind of going like, oh, this is almost done. This will be done very quickly. So once actually getting in there and coding, realizing like what was left to do was definitely daunting. So yeah, it's just a lot of like refactoring, kind of changing of things to get it where it needed to be. And then like every boss that would get added to the game would kind of unravel. Like I remember something like the Siren was a huge thing. And stuff like the Swine Prince, it's like we didn't really have an AI system at that point. So we had to kind of like develop a whole AI system to get the Swine Prince to function. Definitely looked a lot more done than it actually was.
The game materialized into an actual game that was somewhat fun very late. Yes, Kickstarter was huge because we felt like, oh, people want this. But internally, we knew we were selling the sizzle. It's not like they played it and said, F yeah, I'm gonna put $100 to get the deluxe package. So you feel a bit like a marketer, because you're like, man, I hope we can deliver what we offered. And PAX East 2014, which was only a couple months after the Kickstarter, was the first time that anyone other than someone very close to us played the game. Man, it was a nerve-wracking time.
The game at that point wasn't completely finished. The story wasn't fleshed out yet. All the characters, all the heroes weren't made, all the areas weren't created. So there's still a lot of room for creative iteration and creative involvement.
Kind of everything was nerve-wracking. The game was like one dungeon at that point, like one set of party, and town wasn't ready to be shown in like trailers, but we would kind of show it to people to give them an idea of the game. We're always concerned about how things would be received, and that doesn't even really end.
We had no meta game. So it's just like, we set up this little dungeon for you and you have those 4 characters and you get in a few fights. And when we were setting up to go to PAX East, this is a true story. Like someone on the team was like, I don't think we should show. I don't think we're ready. I think they even said like, I'm embarrassed. I wouldn't want to be seen with this thing. And that's a gut check. Like we were shitting bricks a little bit.
That was really hard because I remember sitting in the departure gate with Tyler like, okay, well, if it totally bombs, then I guess we can just run the trailer, and like, oh my God, and if it totally bombs, but that's another check-in, right? Like, if it is unplayable or not fun for people in the flesh, then we really have to think about what we're doing. And so going into that show, the stakes felt very, very high.
We pushed it really to the end. Like, we're cramming stuff in. And we entered into that show really nervous because, yeah, like we had doubts, internally, like in the team. And man, that's just not a good feeling. It's different when you're like playing it and you're like, oh, chef's kiss. Like, I can't wait to serve my stew to everyone because it's delicious. We were still very much like building the railroad track as the train is going. And we showed up at that show, and from the first demo on, it went great.
PAX 2014 was an amazing time. We just ended up with this like massive crowd, and everybody kind of fell into these roles. Like Brooks was like taking people through the controls, like sitting at the computers. And then Jeff, our audio guy, and myself were like out in front of the TV, basically like shoutcasting this thing. And we thought this was like a quiet turn-based RPG. Like, you sit down and just kind of play it on your own. But that's where it dawned on me that like we had found a good recipe for like high drama. And people wanted to even watch people play this, even though I had never anticipated that.
People loved the combat, and they were like really interested in walking through, and we also let them assemble their party. We had a little like menu sheet of like what 4 heroes you can pick. You get, loosely speaking, 2 kind of players, like the players that just love their heroes and do anything to protect them, and then the players that just see the heroes as Crusader 4, Crusader 5, Crusader 6, And we love that dichotomy. There's not a right way to play the game, but certainly our intention is that you should care on some level.
We take a lot of inspiration from like, XCOM and other games like that. But for whatever reason, I feel like Darkest Dungeon is more watchable. And I don't exactly know why. It might be the simplicity of the interface. It might just be the fact that characters are bigger, there's less tactical space to think about. It might just be because Death's Door is like a crazy mechanic and you don't know if the guy's gonna die. And so there's just like, maybe the peaks and valleys are a little higher. But for whatever reason, we had a bunch of people crowded around these TVs and we were calling out what they were doing. And then Tyler, we called him the Sidler because he would circle the back of the crowd and just come up and be like, what do you think of this game? It's pretty cool, right? So we just fell into this like exhibition groove, and that was like a very memorable show because it validated and vindicated like all of our assumptions.
Interacting with those people and seeing them like get it and kind of be excited to keep playing it, and seeing people that like came back. Like we had people at different shows that would like come back to play it again, which was kind of surreal. Just seeing so much press reception when we weren't really sure how much we would get was awesome. And just seeing Chris kind of be vulnerable and kind of open up a bit and say that like, he said like we made a hit game in this like really vulnerable, adorable way. And that's definitely a memorable moment.
We have a good game on our hands. Now, how well it sells, I don't know. And whether it'll stand the test of time, I don't know. But we know that we can sell this game and we're gonna be okay. So that was hugely encouraging heading into this sort of like the trench before the early access launch. We actually had a publisher. We went down to Seattle and we pitched them on it. And we were almost done. Like this was like November before we launched it. We sat there and one guy kept telling us why it would never work. Another guy falls asleep. And then 3 other guys were like super into it. And so we left and we're like, I don't know, like what the hell are we doing? We'd already had like these PAX experiences and we knew the game was good, but we were just running out of cash and getting a little bit nervous. And finally, like a couple weeks later, they sent this thing and they're like, well, we'll give you $500,000 for a 30% basically standard publishing deal. And that was like kind of tempting because it would have solved a lot of problems. Like everybody gets a little bit of money, a bunch stays in the company, we're okay, we can afford to do maybe some more promotion than we thought. But we couldn't wrap our heads around giving up 30% so late in the game. And we just felt like we'd come so far and we'd already endured the worst parts of the stress. And it was just time to sort of live and die by our decisions. We'd done what we could to generate hype, and then I guess the Steam button wouldn't launch, and it was like 10 o'clock, and then finally 10:30 it actually like pushed the build up, and then we just sat there because you can't get like minute by minute metrics off Steam, so we just sat there like just watching people play it on Twitch and they seem to enjoy it, I don't know. And then I think it was around like noon or 1 o'clock, we got the first look at the purchases basically. And yeah, it was like a straight line. Like, holy shit, like we actually pulled it off. Yeah, I cried.
The success we had that first week was just, it was insane. Like, we had no idea. I can't quote the numbers, but they were way bigger than I expected to do lifetime on the entire project. Everybody sort of like was really excited, and then everybody just kind of hunkered down and went into like, you know, we have to answer emails. Like I was actually stopped working on animation for about 8 weeks to answer in the neighborhood of about 10,000 support emails. Like I was just handling all that stuff, and we were on Steam forums and like bugs, whatever, you know, crashes, corrupt saves, all these sort of things we were just trying to take care of as best we could.
Honestly, everything had gone great. The launch went great. People were really receptive to the patches. I mean, there were bugs galore, and we were fixing them and added some stuff. And, you know, so honestly, the community was loving us. Like, we were riding high. Like, it was pretty sweet. I love early access, just like I love Kickstarter. And I also learned a lot about early access. We looked at early access as, well, this is awesome. We're gonna keep experimenting. We'll try different things. We'll find the bits that really work. And the people that bought early access are surely buying into this idea of we're gonna fiddle with the game. The simplest answer is people love new content in early access. They hate game changes in early access. If you fundamentally change big parts of the game, oh man.
Our combat system is solid. It was a good combat system. I'm proud of it. But early on, it suffered from this like syndrome where you're basically kind of at a table saw. You could just chew through the front to get to the back, because the back row enemies were typically high stress dealing, high damage dealing, and you could just compress them down into the front where they were useless, because where the enemy stacks in the combat rank is really important. That's kind of the puzzle aspect of the game.
And generally the back rank monsters are not as good at fighting melee. So if you kill the melee fighters right away, the back rank comes up, and now you're fighting the weaker. It's basically the best strategy. And the core issue was we had built this really cool system of positional combat. And that whole system works because you have this cool attack that only works if you're in rank 4 and you attack rank 2 or whatever it is. That's like the heart of the tactical side of the system. And that really gets a lot less interesting if there's only 2 enemy heroes or whatever.
So it just wasn't working, like it was abusable, and it was too easy to game. I don't mind if people find exploits and manage to break the game in certain ways, but it should be challenging, and it should require some mastery over the core systems to be able to abuse the game. So this was just like too juicy a low-hanging fruit for people, and it eroded this experience of, you know, uncertainty and horror and, you know, the real narrative and thematic goals that really underpin the entire game. So on the surface, it looks like a combat problem, but it's so insidious that it erodes all of the supporting work that the art, music, narration, sound effects, all of that work that we're trying to do to create an immersive experience is getting undermined by this one combat flaw.
So there's a lot of different ways to solve it. Like, you can jack up the hit points of the melee fighters. You can, like, you know, make them tougher, do all this kind of different stuff. There's just like a lot of horrible decisions that can be made, in my opinion. So a solution we came up with is when you kill an enemy, it leaves a corpse. And that corpse occupies space, and so they don't automatically fill forward.
He's like, they're just like null blocks, you know, and then you can't compress the line and you got to deal with them. I'm like, that's fucking brilliant. That's great. It's like one of his best ideas. And we're in early access, so I don't have to draw corpses for every monster. I'll just do one corpse, and then we'll just test that out with our audience, right? Should be great, should be fine.
I kind of wrote the patch notes in a real kind of taking the piss sort of way, like, just when you thought it wasn't hard enough, now enemies have protection and they, you know, do this and speeds are increased and leave corpses and this is more expensive and, you know, all these things. Because honestly, I thought everything we're doing here makes the game better. So we launched that patch, and oh my God, the community revolted.
Everyone got mad because on Monday, a bunch of strategies and heroes and skills were viable, and then on Tuesday, none of that shit worked anymore. Even though corpses don't take up a lot of screen space, the implications were very far-reaching.
People are very good at being loud and angry. And honestly, I understand. They bought a game and they played it for 5 months and really gotten good at it, you know, and strategized and figured out their favorite party comps and what skills they like to use. And they were like, hey, combat works totally differently. I think it's justified that we did it because it's early access, blah, 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 but justified is very different from like the reality.
And then we started seeing articles come up on news sites going like, Darkest Dungeon, you know, the indie darling or whatever has lost its way. You know, the creators are seemingly chasing their own tails to just make it arbitrarily more difficult. All of this kind of stuff like that we don't understand our own game, and you know, this is what happens when you listen to a vocal minority, and this tut-tutting sort of narrative started emerging from like a bunch of like well-reputed sites and some YouTube pundits and other things.
The corpse controversy was taxing on the team. Like, it's not a good feeling to see all those people mad at you. It was surprising, but also like I totally understand it from a news cycle. Like, there is something about the fall from grace that's appealing for people to like know that like, oh, they've ruined Darkest Dungeon because of these corpses is a great headline.
You know, you start having this fear that, holy shit, like it's turning. What if we go from like one of the best received early access games to like the game that started well and then went in the shitter? And that's terrifying because people are just gonna remember where you ended up, right? And so we're like, all this success we've had to this point might get rendered moot.
Like that we killed ourselves, we turned down some money, we did really well for a very short period of time, and then we fucked it up. Not that it even happened, but that's even worse, is that someone else tells you a story that becomes truth, right? And that was my big fear.
This was at the same time, oh gosh, this would have been July 2015. So my dad died in March of 2015. So we launched early access in February 3rd. My dad died 6 weeks later. I had my biggest career high and a personal high too, to definitely my lowest personal low of my whole life. I was basically a fucking shell. And so there was definitely a point where I just kind of like realized I'm like, I need a break. I am not gonna be good for anyone. Like I'm holding it together, but it's tenuous. And so the Corpse and Hound update is like when I finally it was like a couple months later, could clear my head a little bit, and I got excited about the game again, and I made all these changes and we worked through all this stuff. And then went back to Colorado to basically have a memorial service for my dad where we interned his ashes. And like the night before or the night of or something stupid, like Chris and I are on the phone and he's like, man, this blowback is not subsiding.
I was kind of manning the fort, and I didn't want to bug him because it's a very painful experience, and you know, my parents are both still alive, so I know enough about it to know that I don't know enough about it. But I'm like, you go, it's fine. It's fine, right? Like everything's going great. And so we launched it, and then, you know, okay, there's some blowback. It's getting a little worse. Oh, that's what a review bomb looks like. I remember I got on a Skype call or whatever with Tyler, and I'm like, I hate to be calling you about this this time, but this is like a real thing.
You know, we're just having this talk, and I just remember like just feeling so fucking low, you know? I mean, yeah, when you're dealing with issues of mortality, I think it's like, it's pretty hard to understand why someone's so upset that you changed the tuning value. It wasn't that I thought like none of this matters, it's like, oh my God, everything we built, you know? Everything we built is like on the cusp of people just going, you fucked it up. I can't remember the article now, but it was on a pretty big site, and it was just something like, I hear that Red Hook kind of messed up their game in the latest update. Now, to be fair, if that's how 90% of the players felt, I would want to know that, and we would probably change to suit. I have no doubt that for some people, they truly believe that. And for a lot of people, they actually thought it improved, but you're like battling this perception.
It was like his solution too, so he felt ownership over the blowback. I try to relate everything back to Batman. I'm like, it's just like the end of Dark Knight, like they have to hate us for a while. We've enjoyed a lot of sunshine, we've enjoyed a lot of like spectacular success and accolades. They have to tear us down. This is the time where there is an appetite to like knock on us a little bit. And what matters, just like poker, is when you're not getting cards, your ability to mitigate damage becomes more valuable than your ability to capitalize. And so right now, we just have to mitigate damage.
You know, I've heard horror stories of, you know, people changing the tuning on a gun and getting a death threat, you know, and these things aren't fun. But I think there's very few design decisions you can make that are compromiseless. I think that the beauty of like a successful design is what you prioritize and what you didn't, and what you left on the cutting room floor. And so just like we asked players in Darkest Dungeon, like everything you're doing is a compromise. Like making a game is a lot like that, and running a company is a lot like that too.
So we went back and forth on this corpse thing, and ultimately we decided, no, this is the right, correct choice. It works. Did we roll it out properly? No. Did we set expectations properly? No. Should I have drawn corpses for every single monster so that it was like this fun feature? Like, look at all this new art. Yeah, I should have done that, but we didn't think we needed to, and those were our mistakes.
But what we did, and I think this was also a really good decision, is we recognized that even leaving 5 or 10% of our community behind would suck. So we put in an option to turn the corpses off. That remains in the game to this day. Of course, we default that they're on because we default everything to the way that we want you to play it. As much as we do crazy stuff like permadeath, where we're never gonna toggle that autosave and be like, you can turn the save off. I mean, there are ways to save scum, go nuts, they're not that hard, but we're always gonna configure it the way we want you to play.
If it wasn't as big of a controversy, we probably would not have ended up with that solution. I think that was a really interesting way of dealing with difficulty in our option system. Like, we don't have like easy, medium, hard. We have a bunch of features that you can disable if you want and if you're having trouble, which ended up paying out later because we have like a bunch of kind of weird, unique options.
And then we pulled metrics and like 1% of players were turning them off. And we just tanked the review bomb. And ultimately it went away. I mean, people who are new to it didn't know any different, and people who used to like not having corpses adapted new strategies, and we balanced out heroes as time went on. And you know, really, we're talking about a feature in a video game.
I thought at the time that it was a really good solution. And spoiler alert, it still is a really good solution. You're never gonna steer clear of every pothole. And sometimes they're legit potholes that you steered the car into and you shouldn't have. And other times it's more of, I wanted to go right and they wanted to go left. But I think this idea of ta-da, we just changed a zillion things with no warning, you know, we put our foot in it. Some people don't even necessarily not like it, they're just shocked. And then the first posts they read are people going, this is horrible. And then they're like, oh, fuck, it is horrible. And it could totally happen again, you know, and we would stick by our guns again and we'd have better community management tools. But if people are ever wondered, do developers care? Yes, they care a lot, especially when it's our game. The game is the most important thing, and we didn't create a game that was fun in the first place by second guessing the vision, and so ultimately the vision is what carried us through there. After the Corpse and Hound, I think the intensity of the experience, we definitely learned from it and started doing things a bit differently. We were able to kind of change our whole approach. I think that's when we brought on a dedicated community manager. You know, and the people that were upset just because of the feature that didn't have an agenda, they were like, okay, cool, thanks man, happy to keep playing. So it took a lot of the pressure off and like, things got smoother.
It felt good. Like, it felt good to be making work and have an audience and people enjoy it. And when I felt low, I could go onto Twitch and see people freaking out and getting mad at the game because they lost a character, which just brought me endless joy. And everyone was like firing on all cylinders to try and get the game out.
The correspondence between Chris and myself at that time, he didn't know when I was sleeping. I remember having change requests sent to me at like 2 in the morning, and I'd have them by 5 in the morning, and then have my kids at school at 7 in the morning, and then back at work.
The game took about 2 years to make. So the sound design in those 2 years during production changed a lot simply because we were becoming better sound designers. By the end, we had learned so much more in terms of the implementation, how to mix things properly, how certain enemies should sound. We just got so much more experienced and better at sound design. So we actually, near the end, before 1.0 was released, I actually went back and changed a bunch of the Highwaymen sounds because they just sounded so pithy and small, and they didn't sound as large and bombastic as somebody like the Grave Robber, who was one of the last ones to be designed.
The early access, there was a lot of changes. Like, we were doing patches 3 times a week, if not every day initially, and then doing big content updates with new art and new gameplay. And obviously the whole end game, that's like a game in its own, like the amount of different unique things for that.
One of our strategies around the full launch was that we held back the end game, so you couldn't, actually beat the game throughout early access. You could play it limitlessly. And then we were going to add the final resolution as part of the 1.0 launch. And I think that's a great plan because it makes the game's launch exciting for people who've even been with you for the whole of early access, because it's a big dump of new content and finally they can conclude this experience that they've had more or less of over the past year.
Some people had, put hundreds of hours. I know there was at least one person who had like 1,000 hours in the game, like during early access. And so we were really stoked to be able to be like, okay, now you can conclude the game. And also the story Chris came up with to wrap it all up, I thought was really, really cool.
I'm really proud of that final boss. The idea there was you can't defeat this like nightmare abomination god thing with a sword. Like it's insane to even think that you can like plunge a two-handed sword into this thing that is bigger than your brain can even comprehend and that you're gonna kill it and live happily ever after. Like that whole narrative is insane. So I'm like, I want to kill the entire party at the end of the game. I just want to take them away. And you shouldn't do that in games. You shouldn't like grind up a character for hours and hours and hours and get all invested in them and then take them to the final level and have the game simply decide that you don't get to have them anymore. But that's what we did.
Putting in that moment that was like, you have to sacrifice a character no matter what, was from like a conventional, like just mechanical game design standpoint was like, really clunky and never do that. But I think all those sorts of rules are guidelines. It's just like any other craft. I think like knowing the rules allows you to know when to break them. And I think in that case, it was an experience that we wanted you to have.
I think it serves this need to communicate to players just how powerful this monster is like at a whim, you don't exist anymore. And I love that. I think that those ideas are very scary to players. And I think the willingness to pursue them as developers or as designers maybe set us apart from a few other RPGs that might have massaged it down a little bit more. Some of my favorite videos are like streamers fighting the last boss, and we deliberately break how the UI works and we just sit there with the move name he's going to do announced on the screen, and it doesn't play out the way it normally plays out, and the player at the time is always like puzzled, baffled. Did the game break? Did it freeze? Did I have to pick a guy? What am I even picking? They don't tell me what dead. And like the response to that first like sacrifice play is always just like outrage and horror, and you realize that like the player is actually completely engrossed in the experience.
I have to choose? Her? Ah! No way!
I'd be playing the final levels and I'm like, this guy's got to get tougher, this guy's got, and just the ambient stress of working and trying to get the content done. I mean, we're always consistently a little overscoped. You get a momentum around like we're going to launch a game, and so a lot of other stuff just kind of goes away.
I don't really think we had many conflicts in the vision because we just didn't have time to be conflicted. We everything had to line up perfectly to hit whether it be a show or a press opportunity. And part of the team is buying into Chris and Tyler's vision, and that they will figure it out and they'll talk it out and they'll have those discussions and then kind of present it to the team, and we're trying to implement it and kind of get it in.
There was a lot of hard problems to solve and a lot of sweat-inducing moments. So it definitely wasn't easy, and that's not the impression I want to get, but I think Darkest had such a strong core concept that the pre-work we did and that core identity for the game and like the pillars, the creative direction, whatever you want to say, allowed us to just like hang on that all the way through. It's like you're in a snowstorm and all you have is your compass. And you're like, well, the needle says south, so I'm gonna keep walking south, even though I kind of feel like I'm pointed east right now. I don't know. I mean, I think we were lucky. We had a good team, had a good idea, and thank God it all worked.
I mean, the reviews overwhelmingly were positive, but seeing the game do so well on Twitch, seeing the game do so well on YouTube, and just seeing people play the game for so many hours, the game just kept growing. I mean, to the point now where the game is a point of reference for other games, which is highly satisfying.
We're actually living in a period of time where there's games that are coming out that are aping our combat almost exactly, and a lot of times our art style almost exactly, which is terrifying to me because I'm like, how do we top that? Like, to try to outdo someone who has the benefit of doing what you did after you did it. But we've got some ideas.
It's all pretty surreal. It's also very reassuring for people who come into this industry too. We just worked hard and had a creative vision and stuck to it, and I feel that hanging out with these guys, like, we're just normal kind of people. We like playing Mario Kart. We like eating pizza and drinking beer on a weekend and watching horror movies and a big couch. You know, we're just normal people, and we just happen to have an idea that we gave all of our creative efforts into.
It's awesome, like, but we never expected it, so that makes it even more awesome. One of the ones that, was first that really had an impact was like a rock, paper, shotgun 50 best RPGs of all time. And they put us on there. Seeing your game against like right adjacent to one of the games you grew up as a kid that was like formative in your game design career, why you even wanted to become a game designer and maybe even how you think about designing games, is surreal. Making a game that people might remember longer than the release year is still something really like touching. You know, I hope it's not the peak of my career, but if it's the peak of my career, it's a pretty fucking good peak, and I'll take it.
You gotta really love what you're gonna do. I think you really gotta love it, because you have to love it enough that you can go through periods of hating it and still love it. You're married to your subject matter. You gotta love the flaws, and you've gotta love the ways in which it's great. And you have to really enjoy it in your bones, because in order to get a game from start to finish, any game at all, the finishing is the hard part. I think that the earnestness and like the honesty that we have and the love of the subject matter is sort of what helped inject Darkest Dungeon with maybe a lot of heart. I believe it has a lot of heart, the game. I think like any work that gets authored, I think the passion of the creators can come through in a game. Same as a painting, same as a piece of music, anything. And I feel like people pick up on that. It's a real labor of love, this game. A lot of labor, but a lot of love.
I think one of the things we did best, and one of the things I think we're still doing now, is hiring and finding amazing people to work with. I mean, as much as I've talked about how much I love the Darkest Dungeon idea, and that was strong, you can have a great idea and a shitty team, and it's probably not gonna work out. My partnership with Chris, like, I need him in that way. Like, there's no way this would have happened in this way, and the people we worked with, it's humbling but kind of amazingly freeing to be like, I need to ally myself with really talented people. Ideally, you'd love to look around the room and be like, I'm the least talented person here. You know, it's the old adage of like, have the least expensive house on an expensive block, and then that's how you want to buy in. Everyone should aspire to be the least talented person on their team, but also aspire to make yourself as talented as possible. And if those two things come together, then you're probably going to make something good.
Everyone has an idea for a game, or an idea for a movie, or an idea for anything. Their ideas they're cheap, they cost nothing, and they're perfect. That's the thing about an idea, it's perfect. And it's noisy and awful to tear an idea out of your imagination and make it real, because when you make it real, you imbue it with flaws, because it's only as good as you can make it. And it can expose your own weaknesses, and I think that's really hard to do. And the only way to overcome that, I think, is to just be in love with that idea. We all believe passionately in the conceptual, thematic, narrative thrust of the game. We all love the mechanics. We love what we were making. It's a bastard of a game, and it's got flaws, but we loved it enough that we could tear it out of our minds and put it to code and polish it as best we could. It's not enough to be like, I want to recreate a game that I enjoyed as a kid. That's not enough to sustain you when it gets dark.
It's really easy to stick to the vision when everything's going great, but it's those gut check moments when things aren't going great. And there's a lot of talk these days, especially in like entrepreneurial circles, like pivot. Like, don't be afraid to pivot, you know? If it's not working, change it. And don't be afraid to change fast and early. That's definitely not our ethos here at Red Hook. Spend extra time up front really thinking it through, and then just stick to the vision. But this will be hilarious if in a few years we do this interview and the lesson I take out of DD2 is don't be afraid to pivot when things are sucking.
One of the big learnings from Darkest Dungeon, and I don't say this cynically, if we were to do the same game again with a 2 on the end, I could work myself into the grave and it wouldn't make half the splash that the first game did. Once something has been made and consumed, the appetite changes. So I think we're cognizant of the fact that we have to up the ante. We know we have to approach the sequel in a different way and inject that same level of identity, but it has to be different from its older brother. It has to stand on its own 2 feet. It has to be even about something different. There has to be enough about it that's unique and compelling that you can talk about both games evenly. Everything from how we do our art to even, some of the tone of the game is different the second time out because we want to create a different but anecdotal experience. There's a lot of shared DNA. Characters are back, art style is back, but we're taking you on a different experience this time.